Dr. Kriegel, thank you so much for being here today. We're at CDI at TMC, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
If you don't mind, can you take a second to introduce yourself, your title, and your role at Alleviant Medical?
Sure. So my name is Jacob Kriegel. I'm a cardiothoracic surgical fellow, and I'm CEO of Alleviant Medical. And I've kind of left a brief hiatus from clinical practice to run Alleviant full-time. And we're excited to be here today.
Fantastic. So before we dig into Alleviant, I want to go back to your early childhood. Did you develop an interest in technology at an early age, or was there a specific event in your life that led you to medical devices?
Yeah, so I come from a very medical family. I grew up surrounded by doctors. I was kind of going to be a doctor before I even knew what that meant or what I was getting myself into. My family is very clinically oriented. A lot of cardiologists, and I was the black sheep in the family. I decided to do cardiac surgery, which is actually different from cardiology. And one of the things that attracted me to cardiac surgery was it's an extremely technology-driven field. The field didn't even exist, a century ago, let alone half a century ago. And it's a field that was completely opened up by people that were developing totally new ways of thinking about problems, totally new devices that were able to open up new treatment pathways. And so I guess the history of cardiac surgery was very inspirational for me, and here in Houston is really the hotbed of that. In college, I met my first engineer. I had never been exposed to an engineer, shockingly. And I had this moment of like, whoa, I may have made the wrong decision here, because I was so interested in technology and entrepreneurship and business. And I actually applied to medical school, and I took a step back and I actually deferred my admission for a year because I wasn't sure if I wanted to do business or medicine or engineering. And ultimately, I ended up going to medical school, and one of the best things about medical school for me was learning that you can have a career in clinical practice and technology and innovation. Part of my training has been meeting people along the way that have really been able to merge a clinical practice with technology development. And so this is kind of in some ways the beginning of that pathway for me, but it's something that I know that I want to do kind of for the rest of my career.
It's amazing that you can merge two interests into such an important career.
Yeah, and I think there's a little bit of a mindset that they should be separate, that there's clinical practice and then there's industry. And for a long time, I think those were seen as really two very opposing worlds. But I think the opposite is really true, that you need the people that are there practicing that are also kind of informing the tech and the development, rather than just being brought technology from outside and trying to figure out how to use it. So for me, being in the hospital, treating patients, being in the operating room, that's where kind of you get ideas, and that's where you can take those ideas and talk to an engineer and actually build them. And that's what's been so exciting for me about Alleviant, is taking ideas that I see in the actual clinical setting and actually building them with a group of engineers.
That's pretty remarkable. And it's funny that you mentioned that. One of my questions for you is that not all MDs become innovators. So what was that catalyst? So you just happened to find a program that was able to merge the two and then find a Center for Device Innovation that supported that? Exactly.
I mean, I think part of it is finding models of people that have done it, because if you don't see how one is able to merge those, it's very hard to figure that pathway out. So I was fortunate enough to participate in a biodesign fellowship. It's really this new model that I think is a fantastic way of thinking about medical innovation. And it's basically bringing together physicians, engineers, entrepreneurs, and all looking at problems together in this kind of multidisciplinary way. And for me, that was really a huge catalyst in my ability to kind of think, okay, well, it's not enough to just have an idea. What is steps A, B, and C? And I didn't really know the process. I had all these ideas of things I wanted to try and things I wanted to do, but until you actually have a framework and a network that you can use to develop those ideas, it's very difficult to move them forward. DeBakey and Cooley and really these giants that were able to move the field forward by taking ideas and putting them into practice. And then today, there's people still kind of working in that legacy. Obviously, Dr. Cohn here at CDI is kind of the best example of that. And I heard him speak when I was a first-year resident. He came to New York and he did a lecture on innovation in medicine. And it was another kind of light bulb moment of like, oh, I can go to Home Depot and buy a spoon and use that spoon to try something. And until that point, I think the idea of medical innovation was totally out of reach, and it was just something that was done by billion-dollar companies in R&D labs, and it wasn't something that a physician or a physician in training could actually do and think about. So models like that were really essential, and then to be able to come here and work with him and think about problems with him has been amazing.
It's amazing to me to think that the way we've been supporting startups have changed so much.
And I think that's also, one of Dr. Cohn's big mantras is fail fast. And especially, I think there's such an interesting psychological discrepancy between the ethos behind innovating and medicine. You don't want to fail. You don't want to make mistakes when you're treating a patient or when you're, doing a surgery that has to be done exactly right the same way every time. Versus innovating, you want to try 10,000 different ways, and you want to find out what works and what doesn't work and do it quickly. And it's that early stage that really you need support to fail fast. You need financial support, you need just resources, you need people, you need really a whole ecosystem that can help you in that fail fast mode. So that's also really important.
Very well said.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Alleviant Medical for a little bit. What's the story behind Alleviant?
Sure. So as I said, we spun Alleviant Medical out of the Biodesign Fellowship here at TMC. And that program really, basically myself and 3 engineers, we spent a year in all different clinical settings, being able to look at problems that I've seen on the clinical side, but to look at them with an engineer and think about them in a slightly different way. We ended up with a list of something like 200 unmet clinical needs. And we then took that list and we filtered. Out of that, we looked at heart failure, which is just a major unmet need in the healthcare system. We looked at this elevated pressure inside the heart that really is kind of the key to what we're doing and the key to the way we're thinking about the problem of all the symptoms of this disease come from this buildup of pressure in the left atrium of the heart. And we thought about ways that we could lower that pressure. And that kind of led us on this path to develop a device, which I'm sure we could get into, but this is basically a new tool to lower that pressure in the heart.
Well, let's go right there.
Sure.
Go ahead and describe your device.
Cool. So we are developing a minimally invasive device. It's a transcatheter device, so we come up through about a 4-millimeter puncture in the groin, and we bring that device up into the heart through the femoral vein, and we use that to create a hole inside the heart. And the inspiration for this idea actually came from many people are born with holes in their heart. And for a long time we thought that those were necessarily a bad thing. You have to close them, they have all sorts of complications. But it turns out that people born with this hole may have a protective benefit from heart failure. And what we think is happening is that pressure in that left atrium, which is very high, it's actually relieved through that small hole. So some of that high pressure in the left atrium gets shunted into the right atrium and lowers that left atrial pressure. And so we really took a solution that was kind of in Mother Nature, and this is another one of Dr. Cohn's big things, is Mother Nature has solved a lot of these problems. And so we realized that this hole might actually have a therapeutic benefit. And so this device, as I said, comes up through the femoral vein, cuts out a little tiny hole inside the heart, and relieves that left atrial pressure. And we think that if we can lower that pressure, we can reduce heart failure symptoms, keep people out of the hospital, and really improve their quality of life. And so that's what our device is doing, and we've been making good progress on it. So
would you walk us through the journey of a patient from diagnosis to the implementation of your device?
Sure. So congestive heart failure really is a quintessentially chronic disease. Mainly patients over 65 is when we start to see heart failure really become an issue. And it's something that people live with their entire life. And unfortunately, it's one of these diseases that just continues to progress. So from the time of diagnosis, it's about a 5-year, 50% mortality rate. And it's one of these diseases that just kind of, even if you do everything right, take your medications perfectly, adhere to your diet, do exactly what your doctor's saying, it can progress to the point where your heart has completely failed. What we hope is that this intervention will play a role in that kind of moderate to severe heart failure. So not to the point where you are basically at the end stage of the disease. At that point, you really need a heart transplant. And not at the point when you first get diagnosed and you're still kind of functioning and going about your daily life. It's that middle zone where people are really limited by the disease. They're short of breath going up a flight of stairs, playing with their grandkids, getting out of bed sometimes. And that's really the time at which, if we can lower that pressure in the heart, we can have the most impact.
So it's more to improve patient quality of life. Exactly.
Quality of life, reduced hospitalization rates, and really increasing kind of functional capacity, the ability to get around without feeling short of breath. the procedure itself is a same day or a 1-day admission. It's minimal anesthesia, and really would be the hope would be to have people in and out of the hospital in the same day, and get them feeling better right away.
So you're with J-Labs at TMC.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like you're supported in-house with your fellow entrepreneurs?
Absolutely. So, a big part of it is the network of other entrepreneurs and advisors and mentors. People like Dr. Cohn, but so many others in that J-Labs ecosystem, and really on all fronts, on the engineering side, on the investment side, on kind of the corporate development, and what should we be thinking about next, what should we be doing next. It's really helpful to get that insight from peers and also from advisors, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you are anticipating your first in-human in 2019, so what are your priorities leading up to that?
We got a lot to do between now and then. Our big things are, continuing to iterate on the device design, and really that's the animal studies that allow us to do that. We have our first meeting with the FDA coming up later this year, and that's a really critical moment for us to really sit down with them, tell them what we're doing, get their thoughts on if our pathway is in line with what they're thinking. And so between now and then, that's really the FDA and the device iteration are the key things we're looking at.
So two very small things.
Yeah, right. Low stakes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Before I let you go, do you have any closing remarks or anything else you'd like to share?
I think, coming from my background as a physician, I hope that more people get turned on in the clinical world to entrepreneurship, because, like I said, I think there's a little bit of a resistance in the hospital setting, in the clinical setting, to think about ideas and apply them and develop them. So for me, it's been incredible professionally and personally, but I hope more people continue to do it.
Well, you've definitely inspired me. If that
Great.
helps. Jacob, it was wonderful meeting you.
Great to meet you.
I wish you the best,
Thank
and
you.
I will be keeping a lookout for you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Great.